Immortal technique. Was born Felipe Andres Cornel, better known as stage name Immortal Technique, is an American rapper of Afro-Peruvian descent as well as an urban activist. He was born in Lima, Peru and raised in Harlem, New York. Unwilling to change his message for mainstream, he has remained completely independent and created Vital Records. Most of his lyrics focus on controversial issues in global politics. The views expressed in his lyrics are largely commentary on issues such as class, struggle, poverty, religion, government, and institutional racism. Most of his activism revolves around prison reform, hemp reform, and mass incarceration. He has also produced The Revolution of Immortal Technique, which is an exploration of one man's journey, his global journey to fight injustice through music. Most recently, Tech has co-built an orphanage in Afghanistan with the Omid International, and will be doing a benefit show for victims of Hurricane Sandy at the Brooklyn Bowl. We'll have to hear more about that before the night is over.
Not to get too science fiction on y'all, but I consistently ask people, do you think that one day the human race will be so advanced that we don't kill each other over petty differences, over religion, that we don't rape each other, that we don't oppress one another, that we don't enslave people that even appear like us? And every single time I get the response from people, no, things will never be like that. There'll always be poor people, there'll always be rape, there'll always be murder. And then I say, yes, among human beings, but that's how we'll know that we're dealing with the next stage of evolution among our human race. Because one day there might actually be a human being that stands up and says, no, this doesn't make sense. How did you talking monkeys live like this for hundreds of thousands of years? You're no different than the cavemen that came before you because you kill over these superstitious, ridiculous reasons, and your place in history, regardless of what race you think you belong to, what color your hair is or your eyes are, your place in history will be the warlike, superstitious monkey. And I don't believe that that's our place in history. I believe that the human race can evolve now. That our next stage of evolution is not a sixth finger or a third eye popping out of your forehead, not a caricature of revolution, but a real revolution, a revolution of the mind, where we question all of the status quo that have set up the society as unequal as they are. We're at war with an idea right now. You know that, right? It's just an idea. And the sad reality is that unless we face the mythology of the creation of this country, the mythology of the history that we've all been taught, or I should say the bass-backwards history that we've all been taught, I think that we're never really going to get to the meat and potatoes of what this discussion really is about, and it's about saving the human race. Okay? I would just say one of the greatest benefits of activism is educating yourself to something that you might have been completely ignorant about before, and it will help you change your life and make you a better person. If you understand other people's struggle, you understand your own better. By a show of hands, how many people are 23 or below in this room right now? When I was your age, I was on parole from recently being incarcerated. I turned 21 in not the ideal place that most 21-year-old men want to go party. I instead made myself a soup, and I went to my cell and I wrote my mother a letter. And I decided then that if I was going to improve my life, I was going to have to educate myself. I was going to have to confront some of the things that I thought were written in stone about the society that I lived in. I was going to have to confront my own ego and lose a lot of that. And I was going to have to make a change that I wanted to see in the rest of the world and myself first. I can't expect the rest of the world to be disciplined activists if I have no discipline. I can't expect to teach people to love themselves by teaching them to hate somebody they're supposed to be diametrically opposed to. You don't teach people with hatred, You teach them with love, and anybody that's being taught with hatred is on the losing side of not only elections, of political standards, of every facet of what is becoming human communication. You don't treat and teach people anything with hatred. You treat them and you teach them everything taking the page out of the good doctor's book with love. And I think that when I finally stopped hating my predicament and thinking that there were other people that were primarily responsible for it besides myself, who was the first one who needed to take action, that's when I decided that one of the greatest benefits of activism was educating myself, to understand other people's struggles, helping to understand my own. Peace, I would just say that I agree with some of the things that were said about Occupy. It's still a viable organization right now, and I think one of the greatest things we have to realize is not just to keep our focus on the negative aspect of what we're fighting against, but also the positive aspects of the things that bring us together as a people. You know, when people approach you with hatred, they want hatred back from you. That's why they're approaching you with hatred. They want to provoke a negative response because they know what their bottom line is. As a matter of fact, the first interview that I ever gave down at Occupy dealt with this exact question. Why are they so much more well organized? Well, because they know what their bottom line is. They could be gay or straight or Jewish or Christian or white or black, but the stockholders or their final word and protecting their vested interests, that's their goal. And they can sit in the same room and say, hey man, we all have these differences, but this money is the bottom line. And who's in the way of this money? These annoying poor people that want, health care, and they think that they're entitled to the same rights as a corporation. How ridiculous. So I think that what's interesting about it is to say, let's also have the ability to say, hey, if my struggle is important, then your struggle is important. And since we have a history professor, I think one of the things that's really left out of the equation is examining history. How many other movements have there been like this? World War I veterans piled in front of the White House and would not leave. People were scared they were going to overthrow the country. There have been several times during the discourse of American politics where capitalism and democracy are not being synonymous. They're not on the same side. The narrative is very different. If we don't confront these specific things, then I think it prevents us from becoming more inclusive with all of ourselves, reminding people how much of their own negativity is affecting them. When someone says, they come out with a very, very conservative view of Christianity, I love to remind them, hey, there's more about Christianity and Jesus than hating gay people. You understand that there's so much more in the Bible than just that. If you have issues with immigration and you love to read that book, then you're identifying with the wrong people in the story. You're not the Hebrews, you're the Romans. The Romans came and conquered Judea. They told everybody who was there, we're going to make you worship this pagan statue, which was the cause of the first few wars. No, we don't want to worship that. We want to worship what we want. You can't just come here and do this. And who was Jesus? He was a person who was made to be an illegal human being in the country that he had lived in and that his forefathers had lived in. He was born in a manger, which today would have been a project apartment or a hootie. So whose story are you really identifying with? You're not Jesus. You're not on the right side. You're on the Roman side. You're helping to crucify people for no reason. And if we realize that we can respond to it by addressing the common things that we have rather than the negativity of our opponent, because we already know he's a negative individual or she's a negative individual. Why? Because they were never hugged as a child, because they were taught things that were wrong. I don't know. That's something they have to figure out. It's not our job to figure out why they're fucked up. That's the hip hop. I would say we're definitely not in disagreement. It's not that I don't want to address their wickedness. I just don't care why they are that way. They are that way now, and I have to deal with them for who they present themselves to be. I think, to me, it's incredibly hard to advise somebody to read one specific book. I mean, it's just like, pick your mom or your dad. Or your sister, or your son, or your daughter. Only one of them gets to live, all the rest of them gotta die. I would say this, before you decide to pick up a book and research, why don't you do a little research on the research? You want to discover something, then go back to the beginning of it all. How did it all develop? You cannot look at something like Israel and Palestine and think that it started in 1948. The surrounding issues that go back, you have to go hundreds of years back. You want to talk about immigration in America, go hundreds of years back. You have to start out with a text that deals with the origin of what you are dealing with, not just the reality now. I have a dear family of mine, and they're very, very super religious people. But when they quote the Bible to me, I'm like, yes, I read the book. It's a wonderful story. He comes back at the end. It's empowering. No, I'm not trying to be funny or make fun of Christianity, because I honestly believe that if people live by those laws, the message of Jesus Christ, the world would be a better place. But unfortunately, people just use that as a way to put up shields for what he's doing. And all religions are guilty of this, I'm sorry to say. But what I will say is this, that when people quote the Bible to me, and then we have a discussion about the origin of that, and I say, well, let's talk about, how the Bible was compiled in the 4th century. It wasn't written by baby Jesus, it was written by, pardon me, I'm seeing caricature. But it wasn't written by Christ himself. So in order to understand it, you have to go back and read the history of what it is. Imagine someone coming to you and saying, I know everything about America. As a matter of fact, I know more about America than you do. Oh, really? You've lived here for how long? No, I never lived here. Oh, you ever worked here? No. But I read the Constitution. And that means that I know everything about America. If all you've done is read the Holy Book, whether it is the Quran, whether it is the Bible, whether it is the Torah, and you know nothing about the history at that period of time or the hundreds of years before that made that possible to happen, then you are that person that has just read the Constitution and thinks you know everything about America, even though you never lived here, you never worked here, you never paid a day of taxes, you never had to deal with discrimination or any other aspects that revolve around the very creation and existence of what this land is. I had a very negative experience with the justice system when I was a child. And I'll just share my experience with y'all now. When I was 12 years old, I was in Riverside Park on 125th, and me and my friends who were Dominican, Puerto Rican, Ecuadorian, we were all quote-unquote Latino, which just means we speak a Latin-based language. And we were running through the park, and we decided to have a race. Remember those? When you say, I'm faster than you, son. You ain't faster than me. I'm faster than you. You fat. I'm faster than you. And we decided to race. And you'll see that bridge that goes over the west side of Harlem above Fairway. We said, man, we're going to race down from by way of Grantons. This is a long-term foot race. We started running, and I never forget, I saw a flash of metal go past my head, and a cop car jumped the curb. And he basically slammed his brakes while we were running, and one of our friends kind of hit the car and whatnot, and then the other one was like, what the hell? And just ran and peeled off. I stood there like, hey, man, I didn't do nothing wrong, so I guess I don't need to run. I was like, whoa, what's going on? They stopped, and when my friend returned to the scene, they pulled him inside the car, and I remember they hit him with the nightstick, and they were like, why were you running? Why were you running? And I was like, we were just racing. And the cop, I never forget, turns to me and he says, don't lie to me. The only reason that niggas and spics run is when they steal things. If you're in this school, I want you to be a better cop than that guy. I want you to be somebody that's able to break the blue wall of silence and realize that you are part of the criminal activity. The measure of a leader is not just being able to fight your enemies, but to be able to control your own troops. I think that the realization that you should have is that regardless of what your role in the criminal justice system is, whether you choose to accept it or not, you are the future of the legal system in this country from the ground up. And if you won't accept that responsibility, somebody that doesn't care about you and your constituency or whoever your people in your community are, they will accept that role. Because they have a vision for you that you can't even have the courage to have for yourself. Have that courage, have that vision. How do you want to see your government respond to you? Because you are funding it. You may not realize it, but you pay all of their salaries. And when they were at Occupy and they threatened to bomb rush Zuccotti Park one day, the reason they were rebuffed is because they kept laughing. Why were they laughing? Because the chant that we had was so funny. You're one bad bounce check away from being right here with us. I don't hate police officers because of what they did to me when I was a child. I don't hate them because they pulled a gun and put it to my head, or when I was 16 years old getting out of a train station on 86th Street. No, because I don't reward people who hate me with my hatred. I can tell you right now that festers inside you. And I want you to realize that your role in this narrative is not just for New York City, but New York City is an example to the rest of the country. So really, you're on a national platform, whether you want to be on one or not. Thank you. You know, I actually really do have problems with that specific thing, if I could be quite honest. It's hard sometimes to divide yourself among so many different causes. I tell people that it's not so important for you to run out and try to save the world as it is for you to pick one specific aspect that's going to have reverberations around the world. When I made parole, I was working 2 jobs and I went to school at CUNY part-time. So I found it in my character to be able to have the time to do things because I said to myself, if there is no commitment on my part for this, then there will be no end result for myself. And someone approached me and they told me very, very clearly, don't tell me what you love. Show me what you spend your time on. I'll tell you what you love. Don't tell me what you value. Show me what you spend your money on, and I'll tell you what you value. So if those are questions that you can be honest enough with yourself to answer, which I think it's really kind of hard to be honest with yourself sometimes because you look so good dressed in that line in the mirror. But if you can be honest with yourself for a heartbeat and say, hey man, yes, we're going to have to double back on this so I can make more time for that. You know, we don't live in the imaginary world of the Federal Reserve where you can just cut taxes and then keep raising. You know what I mean? It doesn't work that way. There are limited hours during the day, but I think that being that there is social media, that there are all these places where you can reach out online, you know, even to check in and understand what's going on with people. If you can't donate money, then donate a little bit of your time, which is more important and has more significance for a lot of these organizations. And like I said, you don't need to save the world, but if you save some part of it, then you're a part of saving it.
When the crimes being committed are committed by the operators of this system, how does that hypocrisy, how can we confront that hypocrisy? And what can we do to bring about true justice? And is this system the answer, or do we need a real fundamental revolution? Not just a cosmetic one of the mind and also of the institutions that we use to operate our society.
I think the first part of your question, thank you for it, by the way, thank you. The first part of your question is very evident, and I think it was more exemplified by my time at Occupy Wall Street too, because some of the main criticisms of it were, oh, it's a bunch of homeless people. I was like, really, homeless people, like the ones who lost their homes because of predatory loans and other things like that. And they said, oh, it's just a bunch of drug addicts. I said, oh, you mean people who are massively incarcerated by the United States of America for non-violent offenses, who take up taxpayer money and drain the country dry and aren't being reintegrated as functional members of society? When are you going to accept that when rich people have a drug addiction, it's a disease, and when poor people have a drug addiction, it's a disease too, okay? It's not just... It's not just a disease that brings the best acting out of Robert Downey Jr. It's not just a disease that you can slap somebody on the wrist who has the background of an American aristocrat, because there is a class system in this country that we have to confront. And I think that just bringing your question up does confront that class system. There are ways of getting out of it. Listen, if anyone here's father is a cop and you get stopped for drinking and driving, your experience with that situation is going to be very different than mine. Someone whose father's a congressman, someone who's somehow connected to the royalty of America, which interchanges now and then. But I think that confronting the mythology of the system we have is the first step. And I think that short of romanticizing revolution as AKs and jungles in forests, which is not, I think a real revolution starts in the mind, where you begin to say, okay, I'm acknowledging that this is a fraud. And I'm going to tell every single person I know why it's a fraud, and that's where activism comes in. Because you actually have the ability to educate yourself so that when you get into debates and discussions with people who are trying to hold the status quo up, you can say, I'm sorry, but this doesn't really work. Why are you giving football numbers to people who are taking, marijuana? They're not violent offenders, and then you hear some of the rationality behind it, like, oh my God, they can smoke weed and get in a car and drive and get into an accident. Marinate on that one for a second. You also find it interesting that you have smoke that causes cancer. Prove it. That you can readily buy, it's readily available. And then you have an herb that helps to cure cancer. That's illegal in the United States of America. I want you to marinate that one too. But I think that the reality of what we have to do as a people, I think, is say, where do we start psychologically confronting these things in our own minds? And rather than be the person on the corner screaming at random people we don't know, let's start with the people that we do know. Which is why, that speaks volumes as a microcosm to everything else. If America wants to change the world, it don't need to start with the people that it has no ambassadors with. It needs to start with the people who commit human rights offenses to the highest degree that we do back and that we are completely bankrolling in terms of their economy. The
question is this. Do you think President Obama will, in his second term, address the utter failure of what is known as the war on drugs, which is really a war on the underclass? And is this president our last hope for serious national and global consideration on this issue?
Obama, let's do it. I think that if he won't say anything about bombs in Gaza, I think it's hard for him to be pressured by the people that keep him in the position he's in. If he didn't pass immigration reform and then did an executive order and say, hola, me acuerdo de ustedes, please vote for me, instead of pushing through what he should have at that particular time, I find it very hard that he would do that. The only problem is engaging and discussing things with some of his surrogates. And I'm going to be very, very forthcoming and honest right now. I really don't appreciate the way that some of them have treated Dr. West in the past, who was one of the only people. One of the only people to put Wall Street oligarch in the same sentence as Obama on a national platform and survive with his career intact and flourishing. Unfortunately, in this comic book, you don't get to fight the Riddler until you get through all of his rules. And some of them aren't very well spoken, and they don't really carry the president's message or rather his excuses in a proficient manner. So we would just like to send them a telegram that the next time you send somebody over here, please make them a credible individual. Please make them somebody that's open to dialogue and not just some attack dog that feels like the black community should just be in step in line with you. because you've decided to don that cloth and be, there are still problems very much so within the country. I think that addressing that would bring up a lot of other issues, mass incarceration, the idea that people are being incarcerated for non-violent offenses as we did before, treatment rather than simply criminalizing and demonizing the poor subsections of society, while obvious upper classes are given sort of free range in that motion. Yes, you're going to go off to a little spring vacation where you drink coffee and talk about your feelings in California for a couple of months, and then you come back and you're no longer a drug addict. But no, doesn't matter what color you are, you're poor, and you're going to jail for this forever. And I would just say, just to add on that stop and frisk is not just about race, it's about class too. Because if all those people had $1 million to fund their defense, you guarantee that they wouldn't be up there in Harlem or in Bushwick or in Bed-Stuy, wherever they are. Because I'm going to get my lawyer, I'm going to sue you in court and sue you for false arrest, and I have the money to be able to do that. People nowadays don't go to court not because they don't think they can win. They know they can win. They just don't want to spend 2 years in litigation. Sorry. I would just say to add on to that the historical narrative is incredibly important as well, if you are going to have that. Because some people will still be taught history and think that Rome was a great thing. And all it was a gigantic empire where the most perverse aspects of the people who were greatly rich were applauded and seen as the benchmark of civilization. In other words, we need to rehash that old conversation about what civilization truly was and what setting up a government is. We have one person, a half-naked man in West Africa who's tending his sheep in like 1391, right? A guy dressed in full armor with an arc booster jumps off a boat, religious fanatic, unshaven, unkept, takes this man as a slave, lies to him about his history, about all the things that have created his family, tells him and convinces him he's 3/5 of a human being, and yet we consider in society that person the civilizer, and we've accepted the narrative that the other person is the savage. Listen, I have lots of Catholic family. You can pick a better champion than Christopher Columbus. I'm going to keep it 100 with you. That's not an Italian thing. That's not a Spanish thing. The Catholic League wanted a hero. You can find somebody better than someone who was slave trading 8- and 9-year-old women when he first got to this beautiful hemisphere. You can find somebody better than it. Until we confront the mythology of America, any system that we set up will be tainted by the lies that it is founded.
My question is directed to actually everybody on the panel. My question is, I was reading some of Brother Noble Drew Ali's literature, and also some of Haj Malik al-Shabazz, we know him as Malcolm X. I was reading some of his literature, and these brothers continue to make different references to what we are going by. In short, I'm asking my question is like this. The brothers who are Puerto Rican, right? They call themselves Puerto Rican, but they're really Taino Indians, right? The brothers who call ourselves African American, we're called American after Americo Vespucci, and African after Africanus. I forgot the guy's last name. My thing I want to know is, in my opinion, I feel that the only way that us as indigenous people, or as original people, as I would call it, can actually upgrade ourselves if we come back to that base of knowing knowledge of self and knowing knowledge of, as your grandfather was speaking about, the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, how we can come back to a knowledge of ourselves. And I wanted to know for the people on the panel, what steps do you think we can take in order to re-erase what colonialism has done to our minds, our heritage, and our identity?
I would say thank you very much for the question. I would say that when you do live in a society that's been affected by colonialism, you can't expect the people who ruined your society to be the ones to fix it. And I think that when we deal with specific topics of race, I would say that the Latino community, and I say this como una persona que creció hablando español, que creció con... that we are probably some of the most racist in terms of how we deal with it. And you know why I say this? And I'm going to explain my question. You know why? Because it's not just enough to love yourself so much that you'll change history so that it looks like you invented things instead of other people. But at least if you do that, you love yourself. The problem with Latin America's dealing with Africans and the influx of that is that they become the most racist people because they don't like other people, and then they don't even like themselves. I remember Paul Mooney once said in a room full of people in New York City, in a room full of people in New York City, he said, Cubans, Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, y'all ain't nothing but niggas that know how to swim. I started laughing because I thought it was funny, but at the same time it exemplified so many different things. Look, if somebody is Haitian, they speak French, but they're not French, right? They happen to be from a specific area. These things that have divided us were put in place by colonial society because they never wanted people to realize that people who are enslaved as indigenous people are in the same position that people who are brought from Africa and enslaved here are. You have this idea that somehow you're a tiny, slightly bit above them, or you gassed up because you live in the West Indies and you got dropped off first. That's the oppression of one other individual should be your oppression. You know what I mean? You should feel some kind of way when you see that racism being thrown at other people. My mother, when I was very young, reminded me that you should never be ashamed of any aspect that you have in your life. You should rather have people love you for the person you are, rather hate you for the person you are than love you for somebody that you're not. And I think that when we talk about the Latino community specifically, you will find so many instances in which they were clearly at odds with the white establishment because they said, no, we'll take the slaves. We'll take the people that were enslaved rather. As a matter of fact, they accepted help from people that were enslaved as well, because Simón Bolívar would not have succeeded if he was not backed by François Toussaint. And there would be no Latin American Revolution without the Haitian Revolution. And one sad thing that this mirrors is the exact thing that happened here in America between poor blacks and poor whites. They told poor sharecroppers who were working in the field all day while the white master was sitting back counting his money and being with his slaves. When they got home from work, they took off their shirts, these poor white people. And since they didn't tan too well, their back was white and their neck was, it meant you're a poor sharecropper, you're not good enough for my daughter. I would never marry I would never put my bloodline with you. You're still nothing to us. And yet they felt somehow superior to poor black people because of this social narrative. And this takes it back to history, and I'll just end with this, that unfortunately America didn't have the bravery that the Caliphate and that the Roman Empire did before them to say, no, you're a slave because you lost the war. That's it. You know, if you guys had rallied your Sarmatian Knights, then we wouldn't control Daisy. You guys would run Romania and the rest of whatever's up above to do. The problem is that when America stole people, it didn't fit the narrative of what they wanted to set forth. So they had to come up with religious excuses and with these fundamentally flawed historical examples of why one race of human being was less than another, because they couldn't get it into their mind. It was a schizophrenic reaction. Oh my God, we the people, the land of the free, everybody's equal except y'all niggas. That doesn't work, and that's why, unfortunately, that was the problem, because when slavery then dissipated, you were left with the social and the religious lie. And when that wasn't necessary in other societies, it was integral to the story and the legacy and institution of racism that was upheld within the United States of America. So if they had never gone out of their way to put it out there, then it wouldn't still be plaguing society the way it is now. But they didn't have the courage to just say, I took you because you were weaker and because you were a disassociated group of tribes rather than one strong empire that we couldn't fight against.
They've decided to control what the law is. I said it on the Martyr. How can a government that's run by corporations regulate corporations? There's no system of checks and balances there, and I think that that's one of the ultimate failures that we're trying to address here at that conference.
When the Israeli state killed precious Palestinians in the West Bank who are innocent, Those are war crimes. Let's be honest about it. And they say, oh, you hate on the brother. No, I love the brother. He's a war criminal with a Nobel Peace Prize.